Some people visit Buckingham Palace to admire history. Some come to show respect. And some, like Jake Patterson, a 27-year-old American influencer, come to act like complete idiots. He thought he was being funny, thought he was putting on a show for his followers, mocking the stoic, disciplined royal guard on horseback, throwing insults, waving his arms like a clown. Even when other tourists told him to stop, he laughed them off. But what Jake didn't realize, the guard may not react, but the police had seen enough. The sun hung high over Buckingham Palace, casting long shadows across the stone pavement of Horse Guards Parade. Tourists gathered around, snapping photos, whispering in awe, and admiring the iconic royal guard on horseback, majestic, motionless, completely unshaken. But among the sea of respectful onlookers, there was one man who had no intention of being respectful. Jake Patterson, a 27-year-old American influencer, had come to London for one reason: content. And what better content than mocking the stuck-up soldiers in front of a live audience? Jake stood near the massive black-clad horse, his phone tilted up, broadcasting live to his thousands of followers. "All right, guys, here we are. Buckingham Palace, home of the famous royal guards. You know, the guys who aren't even allowed to blink." His chat exploded with laughing emojis. Encouraged, he stepped closer to the guard. The soldier, dressed in a crimson jacket, golden helmet, and tall riding boots, remained frozen in perfect discipline, his horse equally still, trained for absolute composure. Jake grinned. "Hey, buddy, you ever get tired of standing there all day? Ever thought about, I don't know, getting a real job?" Nothing. Not a twitch. Jake's grin widened. "Oh man, this guy is good. No reaction at all. Must be nice getting paid to do absolutely nothing." The crowd around him began shifting uncomfortably. A few tourists chuckled nervously, but most exchanged glances of disapproval. And then, from behind him, a stern British voice. "That's enough, mate. Show some respect." Jake turned, smirking. An older British man, probably in his 60s, stood with his arms crossed. He had the look of someone who had seen enough idiots like Jake in his lifetime. Jake laughed. "Respect? For what? Standing still? I mean, come on, he's not even doing anything." The older man's expression didn't change. "They're soldiers, son. Not props for your stupid little video. Now leave him alone." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. A young mother pulled her daughter closer. "Abda." Group of British teens muttered, "What a twat," as they filmed the scene. But not to support Jake. They were filming his downfall. But Jake? Jake was too full of himself to notice. And then he made his biggest mistake yet. Jake turned back to the guard and his horse, rolling his eyes. "Guess this guy's got a fan club. All right, fine. Let's see if he's really unshakable." He clapped his hands loudly, waving them near the horse's face. Nothing. He jumped up and down, making exaggerated faces. Still nothing. Then, he leaned in, inches from the guard's face, and in his most mocking, exaggerated British accent, he sneered, "Oi, governor, fancy a cup of tea? Or are you too busy pretending to be a statue?" The crowd gasped, and then a new voice cut through the air, firm, cold, final. "Step away, now!" Jake froze. Because that voice? That wasn't the guard. That was the police. Jake's cocky grin froze on his face. The voice that had cut through the crowd, sharp, authoritative, carrying a weight that demanded immediate obedience, belonged to a metropolitan police officer. The murmurs of the tourists grew louder. People stepped aside as the officer approached. The guard on horseback remained motionless, the horse still as a statue, but the atmosphere had completely shifted. Jake laughed nervously, glancing at his phone. "Oh, we got the cops involved, guys. Chat, do you see this? London's finest, here to protect the statue men."
The officer, a tall, broad-shouldered man with a serious expression, didn't flinch. "Step away from the guard, now!" Before Jake could respond, a new voice cut in. An angry British father, holding his young daughter's hand, stepped forward. "Mate, we've all had enough of you." His daughter, wide-eyed, clutched his arm. "Daddy, why is the man being so mean to the soldier?" Jake's stomach twisted. He tried to laugh it off, but the energy had shifted against him. More tourists started speaking up. "You're embarrassing yourself, mate." Someone else shouted, "Get him out of here!" Jake's face burned. He wasn't controlling the scene anymore. He wasn't the funny guy on camera. He was the villain. And his followers? They weren't defending him. The chat was turning against him, too. "Bro, just leave." Jake tried to act tough. "Wow, okay, I get it. London's a little sensitive. Everyone chill, I was just having a laugh." The officer's jaw tightened. "Final warning." Jake smirked. "Or what? You gonna arrest me for joking around?" Silence. Then, the officer reached for his radio. "Unit 42, I've got a disruptive individual at Horse Guards Parade. Moving in now." Jake's smirk vanished. Because now he had officially screwed up. Jake took a step back, hands up. Whoa, whoa, whoa. No need for that, man. I'm just messing around." The officer stepped forward, towering over him. "You were given multiple warnings. You refused to comply. Now turn around." Jake made a crucial, final mistake. He rolled his eyes and waved a hand dismissively. "Dude, it's not that serious." That was all the officer needed. In one swift, trained motion, he grabbed Jake by the arm, spun him around, and slammed him against the cold stone wall. Hard. The crowd exploded. "Oh, shit. Yep, he's done. That's what you get." Jake's cheek pressed against the rough stone. His phone, still live streaming, slipped from his hand and clattered to the ground. The chat erupted. Jake gritted his teeth. His hands were yanked behind his back. The officer's voice was calm, professional, and absolutely final. "You are under arrest for disorderly conduct and obstruction of a public duty." The cuffs snapped into place. Jake's heart pounded. This was not how today was supposed to go. And as the police dragged him away, through the sea of laughing, cheering tourists, he locked eyes with the Royal Guard one last time. The soldier hadn't moved, hadn't flinched, hadn't acknowledged the chaos. And somehow, that felt worse than anything else. Because to the guard, Jake wasn't even worth remembering.
Jake's cheek pressed against the cold stone wall, his arms locked behind him in tight handcuffs. The officer's grip was firm, his voice calm but carrying the weight of absolute authority. "You are under arrest for disorderly conduct and obstruction of a public duty." The crowd was still buzzing. Phones were pointed at him from every angle. He could hear the relentless flood of laughter, the cheers, the murmured, "Serves him right." And then, the worst part. Someone yelled, "How's that for content, mate?" The crowd erupted. Jake's phone, still lying on the pavement, was streaming everything. His chat, absolutely roasting him. Bro went from tough guy to arrested real fast. Jake's stomach dropped. This wasn't just a bad moment. This was a permanent, viral disaster. His followers weren't defending him anymore. They were watching his downfall in real time. And worst of all, they were loving it. The officer yanked him off the wall, gripping his arm tightly. "All right, let's take a little walk, shall we?" Jake's heart pounded. He looked around desperately, as if someone, anyone, would step in and defend him. Nobody did. Even Ethan and Olivia. His friends, the ones who had cheered him on at first, were standing frozen in shock. The officer spoke calmly but with absolute authority. "Just so you're aware, your little stunt, it's all on camera, and not just from tourists. The palace has security footage of the whole thing." Jake swallowed hard. I was just joking, man."
The officer's grip tightened. Joking. You disrupted a soldier on active duty. You ignored multiple warnings. You harassed a government official in front of hundreds of people. Jake tried to laugh, but it came out as a weak, pitiful chuckle. Come on, it's not like I actually touched him, right? The officer turned to face him directly. His expression? Pure, ice-cold professionalism. You'll have plenty of time to explain that. At the station. Jake felt the full weight of reality hit him. He was actually being arrested. And worse, he was being marched through a crowd of people who all hated him. The same tourists who had once been silent, just watching. Now they were cheering, filming, yelling comments. That's what you get, mate! Jake's ears burned. He wanted to sink into the pavement. His biggest fear had just come true. He wasn't famous. He was a punchline, and just when he thought it couldn't get any worse, someone threw a half-full coffee cup at his feet. It splattered onto his shoes. The crowd howled. Even the officer sighed. Right. Let's get you out of here before someone dumps a full English breakfast on your head.
Jake had nothing left to say. As Jake stumbled forward, his wrists still locked in tight handcuffs, the officer firmly gripping his arm as they made their way toward the waiting police van. The laughter, the cheers, the endless clicking of phone cameras. It was all a blur now. His face burned, his heart pounded, and for the first time in his life, he had nothing to say. The moment the officer pushed him into the van, he caught a glimpse of his phone, still lying on the pavement where he had dropped it. It was still streaming, still broadcasting his downfall to thousands of people. And the chat? It was brutal. Jake swallowed hard. This wasn't just a bad moment. This was permanent. And by the time he got out of that police van, the entire world would have seen it. By the time they reached the station, Jake was shoved into a holding area with a bench and a flickering light overhead. His mind raced. How bad was it? Had it blown over yet? Then an officer walked in, holding a tablet. He scrolled for a moment, then tilted the screen toward Jake. Jake's own face stared back at him, front and center on major news headlines. Jake's stomach dropped. He hadn't just gone viral. He had become international news. And then, just when he thought it couldn't possibly get worse. The late-night TV hosts got involved. The Tonight Show with Jimmy Fallon played the video for his audience, shaking his head. Oh man, look at this guy. He really thought he was going to be the one to break a royal guard. Turns out the only thing breaking today was his ego. The audience roared. The Late Show with Stephen Colbert smirked as the footage rolled. Tourists come to London for history. This guy came for handcuffs. The Daily Show with Trevor Noah. Trevor barely held back his laughter. This is the fastest fall from grace I've ever seen. 1 second he's king of the tourists. The next, he's getting cuffed like he just robbed the Queen. Jake buried his face in his hands. This was never going away. Then, the worst part of all, his phone call. The officer handed him a landline and gave him a look that said, "Good luck." Jake took a deep breath, dialed, and then, "Jake Alexander Patterson!" His mother's furious voice nearly shattered his eardrum. "What have you done?" Jake winced. "Mom, You're all over the news. Your grandmother called me crying. Your aunt thinks you got deported. What is wrong with you?" Jake closed his eyes in pain. "Mom, it's not that bad." "Not that bad? They're calling you the most humiliated tourist in British history." Jake groaned. "Can we just—" Click. She hung up. He was so screwed. Back at Horse Guards Parade, the Royal Guard remained in position, his rifle still in place, his horse still perfectly still, unshaken, unbothered. Because to him, Jake wasn't even worth remembering, but to the internet, Jake would be remembered forever, because while the guard had already moved on, the internet never would. Jake sat on the cold metal bench in the holding cell, staring at the ceiling. His wrists ached from the handcuffs, his cheeks still stung from being slammed against the stone wall, and his entire career was crumbling in real time. But worst of all, his phone was gone. And that meant he had no control over what was happening online. And that terrified him. When he finally got his one phone call, it wasn't to a lawyer, it wasn't to a friend. It was to Ethan, his so-called best friend, who was still outside the station. The moment Ethan picked up, Jake's heart sank. Because in the background, he could hear it. Laughter, so much laughter. "Yo, Jake, you're trending. Like, everywhere." Jake swallowed hard. "How bad?" A pause. Then Ethan lost it, wheezing with laughter. "BRO, you're meme of the year." Jake closed his eyes. Back at Horse Guards Parade, the Royal Guard remained exactly as he had been, his rifle still in place, his horse still motionless, unshaken, unbothered. Because to him, Jake wasn't even worth remembering. But to the internet, Jake would be remembered forever, because while the guard had already moved on, the internet never would. After hours of questioning, paperwork, and pure humiliation, Jake was finally released from custody. No serious charges, just a small fine, and a lifetime of humiliation. As he stepped out of the station, the paparazzi were already waiting, cameras flashing, people laughing, and the first voice he heard? A British teenager with his phone out, grinning ear to ear. "Oi, mate! How's that for a souvenir?" The crowd roared with laughter. Jake? Jake kept walking, because there was nothing left to say. The world had already said it for him.